showing up right on the dot of noon. I appreciate it. So this is sort of a pilot electronic pinup that we're going to be doing today. It's about one of our very exciting, newish kinds of projects at Louisville. So what you'll see is a presentation providing some background information, the design intention of the project, different iterations, the way the team kind of came to some schemes, and finally, it will conclude with an interactive section about some unresolved issues still on the project that we'd like you all to kind of jump in on and discuss with us. There is also a Yammer conversation that exists about this project. So, at the conclusion of this presentation, if you have photos you'd like to send or ideas you want to communicate, it's a very easy way to have all that information shared with people who are interested in the topic, and it's kind of a running record of people's ideas. So these guys have worked very hard on this, and congratulations to everybody involved with the lobby wall. I think it looks great. I hope this is how we do this kind of thing in the future. So with all this being said, I will hand off to Rob and Steve.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. So, University of Louisville, this is their sort of ceremonial front entrance. This is Grawemeyer Hall. It's kind of vaguely Jeffersonian, big lawn in front of it. It's not like the rest of the campus, but it's how they see themselves. Next. So this is a very important project for the university. They're part of the state system in Kentucky. They don't get a whole lot of money from the state. They haven't built an academic building in over 20 years, so they have no experience with it. And it's a significant building for them. It's a really transformational building for them. And they're very serious about how it's done, how it comes out, how it's perceived. They have real clear goals, and that's ensuring student success. In spite of having gone to Louisville for the past 10 years for other projects down there, I didn't know a whole lot about the university. Much of what I know, and you may know, is from their sports teams. They have a very high profile in that world. And what they're trying to do now is bring their academic profile up to match that profile, to be a more national player, to be more attractive to students beyond the city of Louisville, beyond the state of Kentucky. It really raise their profile. But they're also well aware that a major part of their student body is disadvantaged students in some way, whether they're economically disadvantaged, they're often first generation in their family, college students, they're city kids from Louisville, Kentucky, and rural kids from Kentucky who may not be as fully prepared for higher education as they would hope. So part of the real core goal of this project for the university is to help those students, to engage them in learning in an active classroom environment. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but it's I think the idea of the flipped classroom, where instead of someone like me lecturing at you, it's groups of students working together to solve problems in an experiential way. This is what the place looks like. It's a relatively new university. Its history was, it was part of the city of Louisville. It was a residential portion of the city of Louisville, but actually a very beautiful residential portion. It's like Brookline, except it's perfectly flat and orderly. And it's just great houses there. But they built most of the campus. You can see these Belushi buildings from the 50s or 60s. These are our two immediate neighbors, Lutz Hall from the postmodern world, Schumacher Hall, both research buildings, their student activity center in the heroic mode of concrete construction. But things grow beautifully there. There's a great canopy of trees. It's just it's green. It's a very pleasant space. So this is back from the interview. This is a classroom at the University of Bologna. 15th century. Same person here, guy in front talking to everyone who is not fully engaged in their learning. So this was part of our case that we made when we were hired for the project. That we, with the Briggs Associates who helped us program the building, are experts in transformative academic buildings that are going to change places.
And Rob, if I could just add, the university is known for its sports, but they've really made this, as Rob described, a huge initiative to improve their academics. And they've made changes, at executive levels all the way through their staff. So this is a real cultural shift for them, and this project is kind of symbolic of that.
Yeah, they have a reasonably new provost. They have a new CFO who's was nicknamed in the student newspaper Hurricane Harlan because he was disruptive to many of the systems at the campus.
He's affected some 600 staff positions to date.
And he is our sort of employer for this project. So, anyway, this has also been the interview. This is a subtle slide because it was saying in the interview that they don't really need new classrooms. They need different classrooms. They have enough classrooms. They just aren't working well for them. So they are growing. They are growing in part by attracting international students, or believe they're going to attract international students. But the real underlying purpose of this building was to create different kinds of classrooms and different environments for students to interact outside of classrooms, and to consolidate all of the student academic services. They have an organization called REACH, which is essentially tutoring. And they're very quick to point out that it's not just remedial help, but students who are excelling use the same program to improve their writing skills, for instance, or math skills, or serve as peer tutors for some of their colleagues. So the building is divided into predominantly instructional space, the red spaces, the active learning classrooms, many of them quite large, introductory science labs for first and second year students, because many students are ultimately playing a role in health sciences, in engineering, and this building is to provide many of the foundational courses to prepare them for that course of study. Common space, 10%, it's a lot when you look at it in the plans. And then the Student Success Center, which combines tutoring, combines academic advising, and often that academic advising is, I can't remember the term they use, but where they tell students they're not going to be doctors and they need to think differently about
Dream crush.
they need to think differently about their academic trajectory. There's a career, so we need some private offices for those conversations.
Without documents, right?
And they also have a portion of the career development, the career resources program in this building, in part to train 19-year-olds who are arriving at college without a clear sense of what their professional trajectory is, to help them understand that the courses they enroll in are going to affect their professional attainment ultimately. So we did what we always do. We laid out all the pieces of the program at scale. You can see many of the larger classrooms, the introductory science labs, the bar of common space, and the green and orange is the Student Success Center, which is incredibly important to them, to the point that ultimately as we blocked and stacked the building, that was the part in the front. That was the part that was front and center. They wanted us to organize it so every student who entered this building from their freshman year until they graduated would pass that resource for them. So here's Louisville. Downtown Louisville, it's one of the river cities on the Ohio. It's at the falls of the Ohio, which is just off the screen, so that historically flatboats coming up the river had to stop, unload, carry them up the other side of the falls and load them into new flatboats. This is where Lewis and Clark embarked on the westward journey. They passed through Louisville and provisioned there, like everyone else going up or down the river. And the university, you can see the downtown, denser. Our River Park project is just off the page on the river. This is the grid of the neighborhood. You can see it's kind of green and leafy here. These are beautiful houses. We'll be able to drive from downtown directly out 3rd Avenue to the campus here. And here's a blow-up of the campus. You can see this the original street grid tracing through it. Ship Street was a diagonal street across the site. which contains all of the utilities that used to be part of the urban infrastructure, so we can't touch that. And this is the site we only chose, but I'll get to that process. Here's another view of the campus. You can see stadium, only a part of the parking lot that goes with the stadium. This is commuter parking. Many commuter students arrive via a shuttle bus to this part of the campus. This is the old Crawford Gym, which ultimately ended up being our site. It's the gym where the first Final Four University of Louisville basketball team trained, so there's a degree of nostalgia attachment to it, but in spite of that, we're going to tear it down. This was, again, from our interview, this was talking about how we would evaluate the sites, because first step is programming, and second step was site evaluation and selection. And they had identified from the interview 3 sites, none of which was the site we ultimately picked. We developed a long matrix. Next, Lisa. We test fit our 155,000 gross square feet on each of the sites. And then it became clear that the new CFO, Harlan, was quite keen on the site, in part for a lot of good reasons. One, it would replace a building that's essentially vacant now. They're trying to consolidate their footprint, minimize maintenance, use the campus more effectively. It also was, at one point, the back of the campus. These are the railroad tracks. They're very active. But just off the pave is Route 65, which is the main interstate from Chicago to Florida, I guess. The campus is very visible from there. They invested a great deal in Warnock Street and created a new entrance to the campus to go along with some of the downtown facing entrances. So this building was, went from being a back to a front. It went from being sort of the edge of the campus to the entrance to the campus. They're planning to tear down their old facilities building here, so at least for the time being, that'll be a green space that you see building across when you arrive on the campus. And if you look at the scale of, this is their main quad. This is the library, their main academic buildings. This is a beautiful space, and this is almost identical to the space that we'll end up creating once we build on the site.
Where's the Baptist chapel on that? Harlan is Jewish, and Rob is trying to convince him to demolish the Baptist chapel.
So, at that point, he said, Rob, you're asking the Jewish guy to demolish the Baptist. And the majority of people in Kentucky are Baptists, so that would err. So the university had their core goals for the project, and certainly ours were to support those goals. But we developed a series of principles for ourselves to guide the design. One was to, because this building is about transforming the campus, we wanted to make sure that its purpose and its impact was immediately visible, however you approach the building. It's a, it's a $55 million, really an $80 million total project cost investment in the campus. So we wanted to make sure that not only do they get a building, but they get to use those $80 million to improve the campus around it, to strengthen connections, to build new space. And we also, like every project, have an obligation for it to function beautifully, to be intuitive for the students who are moving through it, to put the right pieces of the program near the ground where people are coming and going. Probably over 2,000 people will come in and out of this building every class change. So designing it in a way that really makes that intuitive, makes that a sort of memorable, impressive process for students is important to us. So this is an early Cape diagram, I believe, where we thought through what we're doing. We have this dense bar program. We have the labs, the classrooms, the sort of closed boxes of space. Then we have the quad spilling out in front of it. We came up with a strategy of putting the bulk of the classrooms on the first floor and second floor, and connecting those with a sort of grand scale gathering stair. And then surrounding that stair with a transparent, open, glazed piece of the building that conveys the impact of the building, conveys the purpose of the building. That's what houses the Student Success Center. So that was a very early diagram that actually still is holding together pretty well, I think. So we started test fitting things. chopping up pieces of styrofoam that were the size of that classroom, lab, et cetera, diagram, and stacking them up. And what became clear very early, I realize in retrospect, is two things. One is that it is a deep building. So in the middle of it, we had a multi-story space that was a gathering space that was active on all four sides. It brought light into the building. And also that there had to be a way through the building because this part of the campus towards the tracks was no longer the back. You had to get to that part of the campus. So that's this slice through the building here. And then, of course, along with Lutz, Schumacher, and our building, this was a space-defining building. It was building an outdoor room that you transected diagonally, where a major circulation path extending out to the perimeter of the campus to the west was located. So we tried to weave it into the pedestrian fabric of the campus. Another film model, same idea. Big box of program, lower active bar that has the student success components, the gathering space components in it. More diagrams. The first floor has several levels. The gathering stair gets to be a more realistic scale size. The slice through the building shows up here, but we put a glazed piece facing out towards the highway, facing out towards the entrance to the campus. It's another part of that student gathering space, so that when you arrive on campus in the evening, the lights are on, you see the population of the building using it to interact and to collaborate. Another version.
I was supposed to explain that one, but
Oh, here.
I think the blue is glass. I actually carry
Deep thinking right there.
I actually had some really good points, Steve, because one version had the whole ground floor glazed, so you could always see out. Whether you're walking from the student center along Brook Street and into the building, you see into it. And we've kept some of that. You'll see in some of the other diagrams. Fancier model. I think Aaron built this one. It's multiple materials. It was trying to illustrate the ground plane extending out through the building. But the whole idea is that it's transparent. You see into the quad. Another version of that. This illustrates one of the early sectional ideas where, as you walk in from the quad, underneath of some of the shared gathering spaces, up through the building into the daylit central heart of the building, and then on into the classroom bar of the building. And here's a little more developed section. The quad out here, you arrive, you climb up to the second floor, there are classrooms on these two floors, continue through the building up to the lab floors. This was when it was a 4-story version. And this is that outward-facing glazed gathering space that is where students come together to meet and work together, and that activity is visible to the outside world. Early view of the quad that shows the transparency, the brick box behind, which wasn't yet brick, the gathering stair, the ground plane, the activity in the building spilling out across that ground plane out into the quad. Because this diagonal path that follows Ship Street is probably one of the more heavily trafficked pedestrian routes on campus. So we were constantly aware of that. This was getting closer to what we thought was the end of schematic design. This was one of the presentation models we used with the client. It's angular, it's getting a little more compact. Many of the pieces are in the same place that they only ended up.
I thought we were at a really good spot at this point. This was toward the end of SD, about a month or so ago. And Susanna was helping us like tightening the wrapper and defining the wedge.
So are the rooms on the bottom, the tutoring rooms, are those the ones that face the quad?
The quad,
And
yes.
that side
Yep.
of all of them?
Yep. Yeah, there's office space that supports that, and then some of the tutoring spaces here. Whereas all the classrooms are embedded in the building. And that's for a couple of reasons. One was they wanted to have the yellow stuff, the gathering space, all around the perimeter. So we put the classrooms in the middle. But this classroom building is also on the flight path to the Louisville airport. which is the international headquarters for UPS. So every morning about 4 a.m., planes fly over every 45 seconds or so. Closer than they do at UMass. You feel like you have to duck down and come by. So it's loud, and this was a way of isolating the classrooms from that ambient environmental noise. So this looks like a step back, but
This is a step back.
We stopped to think about if the program were driving this building, you know, irregardless of the scale of the buildings around it, what would you do? You know, and the answer, and Susanna was part of this, was you press the building down. You know, everything wanted to be low in the building, so those 2,000 students could easily come and go from the classrooms, so that the Student Success Center was readily accessible and visible. So this was a model that said, well, what if the classrooms are in a low bar here? You know, how much do you have to spread them out to fit them? That's the backdrop. That's one of the walls along with Schumacher and Lutz of this outdoor room. And the outdoor room doesn't end at the face of the building. It really extends all the way in. And the good stuff, the active stuff, the part that conveys the university's goals, that conveys the impact of this building, is in a glassy pavilion that's in the quad. You move around it, you move under it, you move through it before you get to the real edge of that outdoor room. So we went down at what we thought was the end of schematics and presented 3 alternatives to them. This was the idea of a 2-story glass box, brick volume behind it. You walked under cover. There's a real tradition here of moving under buildings before you enter. The 60s buildings, the Bushy buildings, are really very beautifully scaled. You walk under the buildings, you walk outdoors through the buildings, and it's really a very pleasant condition. So we were addressing that condition here. Another one that's very similar to it, and then the outlier, which of course was the one that everyone thought worked best. This was the idea of the brick box like its 2 neighbors that shape the space. The program, the student success program, is in this glassy box that projects out into the quad, but really the quad continues on through it and under it and into it. So they picked this version and said, but make it 2 stories. You know, don't change the blocking and stacking. Just make it look like that. So Steve and I in the airplane home figured out the scheme. And that's what led us to where we are now. That's reflected in this model. This is only the pavilion half. This is the glassy half. The other part is the bar building that you see on the table. And we'd love to get your thoughts on how that space is organized, what materials shape it, how is it lit, all those components, and how does it connect the site into the building.
So one of the things I'm really fascinated about this project is this cultural shift. And you have on one side the people who are embracing it, and you have on the other side the people who are resisting it. And I think it can be, it's starting to become apparent when we're looking at how we're dealing with the site. We have a local landscape architect, and we haven't been completely impressed with the solutions and how they fold into our project. So we've actually had planning take a look at this, and Mitch has helped us a little bit kind of define some basic principles for the site and also how they relate to the campus. So as Rob discussed, as Rob mentioned, the building overlaps the quad, which is much different than the other quads where the building's framed in quad. So our building is engaging in it. But we have the classroom bar, which is creating a wall. Another concept that we're considering is the quad surrounds the building, and we're going to respect the existing paths. The ship access is important, and we think we want to try to maintain that. The new building has a significant entrance centered on the quad, so we're considering whether a new path directly to it or orthogonal, like other paths in the quad.
Or both.
Or both. And also to create a sense of enclosure around the quad. Right now, these buildings are so massive, it just feels out of scale. This is our party, and in the green is the academic spaces, the classrooms, and the blue is the student success.
And the gathering spaces that are associated with it. It's the idea of the quad extending to and through and focusing on what I imagine being a permanent forecourt to the building, but it may not actually turn out that way on the other side of Brook Street.
Right, which this is a main entrance to the campus. So we're looking at the building as having two fronts.
In Brook Street extends down to the student center. It's increasingly important pedestrian path through the campus, and when they're able to devoting resources to pedestrianizing that space. It also floods and storm events, so it's 7 or 8 feet deep. So we have to raise our building up almost 8 feet from the roadway here, which is a difficult thing. This is the diagram that talks about how you move up through the building and into the academic classroom portion of the building. And this is that same diagram in a bigger context. This is the library quad. There's also a path called the L Trail that extends north, that follows the old 2nd Street route. So, students are coming from other classroom buildings and library through here. They probably also will be circulating through from the L Trail, which is fairly heavily trafficked. This is that Brook Street corridor leading to the Student Activities Center here, and this is that primary entrance from Route 65 from the new face of the campus.
And I think this diagram illustrates kind of the, let's call it the debate on whether they, the change in the cultural shift is also represented in their, the way they treat their quads formally. And as of yesterday, we were experiencing some resistance on engaging the quad as much as we are.
How far out is the building projected in the quad? What's its character? So we're looking at alternatives to that. So I'll go through the building top down. Top's the least interesting part. Mechanical space. They've asked us to provide shell space, which is outside of the program, if we're going to do that. So for the time being, that's shell space. 3rd floor is lab floors, sequence of biology labs, shared prep space, chemistry labs. This is the open stair coming up from the floors below, and this is, at least for now, gathering space, collaboration space around the labs. 2nd floor, where the bulk of the classrooms are, there's also a component of the program they call the Teaching Academy, because they now will have 14 new active learning classrooms, but no faculty who are trained to teach in them. So the purpose of this space is to take faculty who are excited about the prospect of teaching differently, about changing the curriculum and all the work and anxiety that goes into that, and house them in the building so that they can essentially be peer tutors for their fellow instructors to teach them, to first of all get them excited about using these new active learning classrooms, and then teach them techniques for doing it. Ground floor, the first contact with student services, whether you arrive from the quad entrance, whether you arrive from the south, you see it, whether you arrive from the east, you see this kind of intake desk. The idea is that students will come to them with a problem. They may not know that the reason they're failing math is because their financial aid ran out and they're worried about not having enough to pay for their education. So it's a place where students come with a problem, they're directed to the appropriate people to help them with that problem or to advise them about that problem. And then the balance of the larger classrooms on the ground floor. we rendered an active learning classroom. We've got a ways to go on the design and development of the classrooms, but one of the interesting things is that this sort of double glazed layer on the edge. There's a glazed wall to the classroom, perhaps back pane of glass, there's a writing surface, and a corridor outside of that. So the classroom gets barred light from that corridor through that wall. This is a view entering from the south. This is that central space. You enter low. This is the gathering stair that turns the corner up above, the Student Success Center here and here, and the clerestory above that both brings light in, but also changes the scale of the space. It makes what's treated for building code purposes as a two-story space, i.e. not an atrium, into a more monumentally scaled central space. And you can see the lab space up above it. And here's that central gathering stair, modeled in some ways after the HBS stair, after the NKU stair, as a place where students can stop and talk immediately after they enter the building. That two-story space is surrounded by gathering spaces on each side, and this is that second to third floor stair that takes you from the main classroom level up to the lab floors, which is shown in the model. View from arrival to the campus. This is the east side, Warnock Street, and this is that two-story gathering space, student gathering space around the second and third floors. Ground floor is largely transparent. There are also gathering spaces for students on that floor. So this is the place where when you arrive on campus, you understand what's going on in the building. You understand University of Louisville's aspirations for their future. And this is the view from the quad, showing that two-story piece, this gathering stair, the student success tutoring spaces up on the second floor. There's a cafe down here that opens up onto that main path. This is the transparent part, the low-scale part, the part that engages the quad most actively.
So there are three things we want to kind of focus the conversation on about our design and our process and moving forward. One is the site, and we touched on some of the issues that we're looking at there and principles that we've framed. Then, as Rob mentioned, the central hub, if you will, or atrium, we're still looking for a great creative name for that space, so feel free. And also the clear story and how we're bringing daylight into the space are things that we want to kind of open the conversation to. And I wanted to quickly mention, I know Lisa, it's a cheat sheet. I didn't want to forget anyone. I just wanted to thank everyone who's worked on the project. Rob, of course. Jim, Kate, Alicia, Susanna, Jose, Garrett, Mitch, Bernard, and Aaron. And if I missed anyone, I apologize, but thank you. It's been a good project to work on. So thank you.
You like me, you actually like me.
Is schematic design officially over at this point?
We wish it was.
Oh.
We're trying to get to escape velocity, and we're not quite there.
We're in the twilight zone.
Yeah, we should, the university architect that was in charge of our project just left as part of, this cultural shift, I suppose.
Ooh.
And is going where?
To Nashville.
Nashville.
So,
K through 12.
So we have a new architect for the university that we're working with now who has very different ideas of the direction the project should go in. So we're just trying to wrangle that in. We're going to be meeting with them next week.
Does it rain really heavily in Louisville like that?
Does, yeah.
Entering before you enter kind of thing. You think that's
probably maybe that was the basis for it. Yeah, it floods all the time there. It's like they have floodgates in the downtown and they close when the river rises.
Right behind our building, there's a stick with, foot up to like 6 feet.
The stain marks?
And it floods like
over my head.
And they're kind of okay with it.
Do they also have covered sidewalks, like in some parts of the south, like canopies along street sidewalks?
They don't, that I've seen. They have some, loges built into the
Right.
downtown buildings, but it's also cold there. They claim that the climate's not very different from Boston. It just doesn't stay cold as long. And it's blindingly hot in the summertime. You walk out and you can't see it.
With the same facial expression.
That's what they say.
So when you showed the outlier, but we like this, but we want it to be this many stories, that was strictly, their feedback was strictly based on the blocking and stacking relationships?
Yes, yeah. They vetted them with all the various users. Everybody was excited about it. They liked it. They
So
didn't want to back up.
They didn't want to back up on that.
But when I say they is not a unified single
Right.
organization. Different people have different opinions, and they don't talk to one another as often as we would hope they would.
So should I suggest people come around the table and we can, the model, we can take it apart and start to look in, the inside spaces or?
Are we doing anything from, like, if it does flood, like you were talking about, are we thinking about, like, the resiliency of the finishes, maybe on the first floor?
We're above
things
floor.
like-
We're built,
You
everything,
are.
there's no basement, everything's above.
If it floods above where we are, then the campus has a much bigger problem.
The city does too.
The city too.
And the reason it floods isn't because there's rising water all around it. The storm water, the storm drainage system is inadequate in that part of the campus. So it fills up faster than it can drain away until it gets up to a high point and then it spills over. So it only goes so high.
So Rob, that's different than the River Park
It
Place
is,
flooding
yeah,
issue?
where it just keeps going and going and going.
Okay.
All our utilities and tunnels that flood as well.
And at first they said, well, build a basement, but just make it waterproof. And then they said, oh no, but the tunnel's flow, it fills up the basement, so.
Like a faucet. So,
So in terms of the quad, is there an attitude we're having towards what happens in that quad? Like, is it a place where frisbees get thrown, or is it more of a garden that you kind of meander through? Or is it sort of trees and filled with all sorts of trees? Is there something where you want to replicate something else on campus, or call it something completely different?
That's a really interesting question, Ryan, because we actually presented the idea that we'll take that library quad and do it again here. It's a beautiful, it's like Harvard Yard. It's got a ceiling, tree canopy over it. It's defined on all four sides. But the student said, wait a second, that's a nice quad and everything, but we already have one of those. We want something different here. And one of the suggestions was a more open space for student recreation, for frisbees, for just a whole range of activities they couldn't do in their main quad.
and I don't think the rendering does it justice on the actual scale of the quad. It's a large space and you could play frisbee, and
You play
and
football.
our building engaging the quad as it is, it's certainly starting to suggest a different type of vocabulary for this space than.
Sorry, keep on, Ron.
Oh, so is the temperature there sort of where students are out using the quad till December? Like, or is it something where it's just a pass through to get to the next building, as often these
Right now,
Northeast are?
Right now, it's filled with apple or fruit trees.
Yeah, these are flower
So it's
cherries.
not a great place to, the ground is covered with fruit or whatever. It's just not a really great place to look like you could go sit down and.
The trees are about that high, so they don't,
I love
spaces block your view.
Not right this moment.
It'd be interesting too, like, dealing with the quad in today's day and age where people have their computers and want to plug in. Do you put outlets everywhere? Do you put tables and chairs and like umbrellas or shading so you can see your computer screen? Call it the new quad for the new age, for the new building.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, we have some covered space where you could be in the shade around the building, but maybe that extends in some way out.
Because there's a series of pavilions that are out there, not to get the budget or we want to go designing all those, but trying to think of different ways of doing the quad rather than just open grass and paths in each spot.
With the hub space, what other activities are going to take place in here? The renderings is sort of like this kind of gathering zone, but at least other projects I've worked on within this office, there's always, we have receptions here, or sometimes we have presentations come in, or this door opens up so we get some big objects in. Is it gonna be a like multifunctional space, or is that overhang you guys have where you can look down onto it? Is there other like activities and events that are gonna happen within this space?
I think so. For instance, the career development department often has big workshops, and they want to bring in, 40 employers and set up tables, and, or have a lecture or presentation outside, not in the classroom that's regularly scheduled, but out in that public space. So I anticipate that they'll use it for those kinds of presentations at least.
And the classrooms are large. They're 120, on the ground floor, there are 120 person classrooms with dividable partitions, so they can be expanded up to 250. Now, we're not sure how that works with a flat classroom with that many people and active learning with tables, but it's we're trying to be as flexible as possible. Right now we have services under the floor and things like that.
Yeah, I think they will. They probably don't even know yet the range of ways they'll use that central space, but they have specifically mentioned events around tutoring and around career development.
There's only a handful of people at the university that actually understand active learning, right? And they're all on our committee, so they're trying to kind of spread the information.
Evangelize.
Yeah.
What an impression I have, and I'm kind of struggling with it over here. You showed a interior perspective with the hub ceiling seemed to be sloping, and it went through the bar building. Yeah, so it's going through. So I'm thinking, is this a bar building with this thing attached to it? But the thing attached to it is actually, from all perspectives, is more massive than the bar building. So it's like two buildings, and I want them to somehow interact, and one is subordinate or something.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Maybe the brick of the bar building actually adheres here, and the kind of loose part seems a little loosely programmed. I mean, I could see a value engineer guy coming in and saying, hey, there's a lot here, let's cut some of it.
Yeah, no, we purposely programmed that space in. That's part of the 10,000 feet of collaboration space and interaction space. So we're trying to develop a different character between the two-story part, the part towards me, from the denser part. And maybe that's, this is the one area where the two intersect. So I think that's part of what we're trying to figure out is how that intersection occurs and what the nature of the transition is from the lighter, open, glassier part to the denser.
And I don't think we,
part.
this is, the problem with rendering is that this is the first time we looked at the space really, right, in real terms with materials. And so we haven't responded to this yet. This was at our end of SD, and we've been kind of working on other issues at this point. So we haven't really gone back and taken a look at this. But I think, like your point about brick and other materials and how we can kind of express the bar and clarify the diagram is probably something we need to do next.
I'd like to start by saying I think the logic behind the project and the process, the whole build-up was really great. I really appreciated that. That was something that really wasn't on the wall, so it really helped kind of explain the project a lot better. For me, I feel like I'm struggling with the partee and what you were saying in terms of the two-story volume actually being a part of the quad and the green space and how that works with the model and the partee you showed. It like I almost want this ground floor to be grass, or like it's actually a courtyard space or something, and that would really separate the two pieces, and then it does actually become a part of the quad, or it's more of an extension of the quad.
And when we met with the lighting designer earlier or last week, that's kind of the tone that we were talking about.
But that's outdoors. space in some respect. But we'd love to try to figure out how to amplify that idea.
I think that was part of the concept that we looked at, was where the cafe is and where the student success center is, that the paving could be very similar both inside and outside.
And the cafe can actually.
Sort of solid benches out into the landscape that engage the quad in the building, but also the building and the path, that diagonal path, which is really important.
I feel like if you do that, you could also use, like, let's say there's a skylight in between the slice, which you guys have, but you really express that more to separate the two buildings, and maybe a part of that does become outdoor space, or, you know, I think more of a separation needs to happen in the partie than what's.
Yeah, at one point,
In the partie or in the building design? Because the partie seems to be the clearest thing to me.
at one point, this was a skylight, you know, it didn't have the clerestory roof over it. And then, you know, these two can't quite, they don't fit together because they're.
Right,
Yeah.
but I almost don't want them to, right? If what you're saying is,
Yeah.
this is a separate thing, like, does it actually become separate?
Right, is it unclipped?
Because right now, if you go back to the diagram, you've got the slice that you're talking about is just this little aperture that's, I mean, this is tiny.
Which one are you looking at?
Go forward to. More.
Yeah, like, so this opening is pretty small, that's really, so
I mean, you're picking up on something. This is the one, the south is ironically the area of the building we studied the least at this point.
I just think
And
it,
how that expresses itself just on the outside is.
Yeah, Steve, that's a crucial moment. It shows up in your partie as well, the way it's sort of, you know that there's a collision happening there between these two worlds, and it's not quite resolved yet, but to Dave's point, and really what you just said, that moment, that's where you're trying to invite people up and in, and that's a crucial thing to study further in the next step.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the entrance to the hub space that connected.
Yeah, it's only one of the entrances, yeah.
So there is an entrance on that side?
There is, yeah, if you, please go down on the first floor.
Oh.
There's the drop off, so people who would arrive by car or bus might enter from there.
Where do they enter?
And it's sort of articulated by the curve ends there or
There's a drop
something
off
like that?
And then they
Oh, I
go
was
from
talking
there
about
over,
Up there somewhere.
Oh, there's also an
Yeah, I see
entrance
that little thing.
on the east side that faces Brooks
I
Street.
mean, and we've always kind of recognized this as being a critical intersection, and that's one of the things that we're like putting out there today for, you know, for feedback and how to resolve that. It was much easier, or we were much more successful when it was an orthogonal scheme and we tightened the wrapper, right? But now with the curve, it's been more challenging.
So what's happened here with the model, I'm not quite sure what it is, but it seems like most of the building is in that thing that's supposed to be special. And it could, I mean, it seems that more building could be back in that bar. The bar could be bigger and it could really engage, it could really look out on that quad. Rather than right now, it really looks at that courtyard, and the view out to the quad, it seems like it would be your back.
Well, the bar houses all the classrooms, and there's 14 classrooms and 12 labs in here, and they all, maybe with the exception of biology, look inward. They're heavy
Right,
on
right.
technology, and, you know, so it kind of makes a lot of sense that where those are, and the scale of that bar to bring daylight into those internal spaces.
But it looks like student services is relatively a solid kind of thing. And it's also out in this part that's supposed to be this lightweight thing.
Yeah.
That's like wiring down the brochure.
Right, the edges are all open, the partition spaces are pulled back as much in the pool as you can.
And funny enough, every time we meet with student services, their boss tells us they should all be in open offices, but then they're all in small, they're private offices currently, so that's again that kind of, the challenge of the cultural shift.
That fight is happening on every single college.
Yeah.
Another, Steve, to get kind of to your question, how you deal with the cross access, I feel like if the stair was pushed out into the space 10 feet, and it's like a knuckle, rather than right now it's
South.
tucked.
This one?
Yeah, right, it's
West.
tucked behind where it's hidden and like just kind of peeking out. Which you can see on the rendering that you guys did, where it's really just barely peeking out, right? But if you imagine that whole stair becomes in an object inside that space, and it becomes a focal point that basically is the pinnacle for your two axes, that would help.
I saw this stair, where did I see this stair, Kate, yesterday on the
Bamfa?
Banff? In this Berkeley's Art
California.
Museum, they have they've employed a similar kind of central space. And it's
I feel like Hammer moment.
Because then the stair could in theory be accessed from four sides, and
Yeah.
it really becomes a focal to that
The whole thing.
Yeah.
two axes that might help with. So the south entry and the whatever the west entrance,
Yeah.
they're really just kind of paths that lead to a central space in the heart of it.
I think that one of the most compelling images was one of the earlier ones that maybe Kate had done, where that whole ground plane, you could
Right.
see from the outside, it just spilled up. And there's, what seems like has happened, the payoff has been internalized into this slice, and it almost wants to reach out and get some expression on the exterior again the way it used to, both probably on the first floor where you understand that big cascade gesture, and also sort of poking through. There's a lot of small circulation spaces around the outside, even on the curve.